A lonely, scared, and confused international student from a foreign country called Ethiopia. The people that I had my hopes on weren't really there for me, and the God that I praised in my good times vanished from my mind because of the difficulties and depression I was experiencing. My life was shattered. I was filled with guilt and shame. A shame basically because I couldn't make my parents proud. What killed my inner self even more was the thought of how my beloved and hardworking father back in Ethiopia would have said, knowing my circumstances, since he has been striving all his life hoping to see my success. Going back and forth, thinking of my circumstances, I was in despair, and I went in a blind path for almost 5 months, a path that was fruitless. With my way being fruitless, my character changed in a way that I chose to be alone. I had a lot of questions for God, but he never responded, so I felt like he was punishing me. I was ashamed to present myself to him, so I chose to follow my own path. At the beginning of the 6th month, which was on February, I made an Ethiopian family who were Christians. I was very happy because at least then I knew I had someone who would help me accomplish my whole purpose of coming to the US, which is to get into a college for a better education than my home country. These people were very kind and they welcomed me with love and affection. But although they tried, they weren't able to lift any burden from my shoulder. Rather, my state of depression elevated way higher than before. They told me to pray, but with all the things happening in my life, I had never thought of prayer. However, now I asked God on what I should do, and as quick as I had expected to hear answers from him, he chose to answer it in a different way. For every specific question that I had, there was a specific person assigned to answer my questions. Everything started to make sense when I was invited by this Christian family to go to our church they went to. At first, I refused to go because I used to go to an Orthodox church my whole life, and attending a Protestant church was a bit strange for me. But then, after thinking about it all night, I agreed and went with them on Sunday morning. The church was very different, and honestly, it didn't look like a church. There were no pictures of Christ or Mary, and I said to myself, well, that's quite strange and inappropriate. I thought so because, as far as I knew, a church wasn't supposed to be like that. As I was in the middle of criticizing, it was time for prayer. This specific prayer was different than all the prayers that I had experienced. Not because I was in a different church, but because what was in front of me while I was praying was just a cross. I mean, wasn't there supposed to be something accompanying the cross, like a statue of Mary or other angels or saints? With all the questions that I had, it was time for worship music. I'm a person who expects a lot, and I find things inappropriate if they are not like I think they should be. I was basically expecting for a bagana or a kara, which are Ethiopian traditional instruments that I found appropriate to worship God with. But the instruments in the specific church was a piano and a guitar, which are the same instruments that even all the non-gospel musicians used to play their music. Finally, I told myself, enough, Ruth, you have a lot to handle, get up. My inner thoughts were loud till I was interrupted by a voice of preacher who was giving a sermon. My inner thoughts drove me to get up to leave, but I sat back into the same chair because I was interested in how the preacher connected the Bible words to our lives, and all of a sudden, he told us to all get up and pray with him. Being moved by his preaching skills, I was probably the first one to stand. Then the preacher told us to close our eyes because he was going to tell us a story about this little boy who grew up in anger with a great desire of avenging his father's murder. While the preacher was talking, I was in a different place, and a place where all the people that were around me were not there. My heart was beating so fast that I wasn't able to do anything but just listen to the man's word. The preacher further explained the fact that when the little boy started to know God through his words, his vengeful mindset was transformed into a level where he went to his father's murder house and forgave him. I was still in that different place where I was so scared that I would lose the moment as soon as the man stopped talking. As I feared, the man stopped talking and told us to open our eyes. My eyes were filled with tears that can probably be the sum of all the tears that I had in my life. I was amazed, and I closed my eyes thinking I could experience the feeling again. How foolish of me. Similar to the story of Emmaus in Luke, where Jesus explained the scripture to the disciples, the preacher was a person sent by God to help me know about the scripture before I even realized that I was able to experience the treasureful moment. This is similar to how God to how Jesus kept himself, I recognized the disciples on the road to Emmaus, but then revealed himself to them when he broke the bread and gave it to them. Secondly, on this road, Jesus made himself the central idea when he told them all that was written in the scripture about him. Similarly, God made himself the central idea in my life by answering all the questions that I had about worship instruments and picture of angels, by making me bow and kneel down to the one and only everlasting Creator who laid himself on that very cross I had bowed down to pray to. After then, God became my comfort, and since that day on, the Bible became the food to my soul.